She is not real, not truly. Not the way your hands are real, or your breath, or the way disappointment tastes when you realize she is not who you imagined, and yet you keep chasing her, the perfect woman, the one without flaw, without hesitation, without contradiction. She lives in your mind, more vivid than the women around you. You see her in strangers, in glimpses, in dreams that leave you aching. But Plato warned you. Over 2,000 years ago, he whispered a truth most men are still too ashamed to confront, that the ideal woman you adore is not a woman at all. She is a concept, a ghost, a silhouette projected onto the cave wall of your imagination. And the more you worship her, the further you drift from real love, from real women. Because ideals cannot be touched, they can only be mourned. Plato's theory of forms wasn't just about geometry or justice, it was a diagnosis of the male condition. He said that everything you see, everything you feel, is only a shadow of its truest version, its form. That means every beautiful woman you've ever met, no matter how dazzling, is still only an imitation of beauty itself. You think you're falling in love with her, the girl with the laugh, the hair, the smile that stops your breath, but you're not. You're falling in love with the idea she reminds you of. That's the sickness. Not that you desire beauty, but that you believe someone can ever fully become it. You're not obsessed with her, you're obsessed with what she symbolizes. And that obsession doesn't elevate you, it traps you. Men who chase ideal women aren't hopeless romantics. They are prisoners of thought. They don't want love, they want transcendence. Something clean, something eternal, something that doesn't argue back. Because real women are unpredictable. They cry for reasons you won't understand. They age, they fail. They love you, then don't. And if you're worshiping the ideal, that unpredictability feels like betrayal. So you retreat. You convince yourself you just haven't found her yet. The one, the perfect match. As if she's waiting behind some cosmic curtain, untouched by time, pure, devoted, always radiant, always kind. Plato would laugh, because to seek perfection in flesh is to chase clouds with a net. You catch nothing, but you keep running. And in doing so, you become smaller. You become lost. And maybe you felt it, that hollow crash after the fantasy fades. The way your heart recoils when she reveals her messiness, her demands, her humanness. You feel cheated, don't you? As if she's the one who lied, but she didn't. You did. You lied to yourself when you saw her and thought, finally, a goddess in human skin. You didn't want a woman. You wanted a mirror, one that reflected only what you needed to see. Plato's wisdom cuts deeper than romance. He's telling you this. To desire the form is divine, but to confuse it with the real is madness. And men, especially intelligent, sensitive, visionary men, fall into this madness often because they are searching not for companionship, but for confirmation, that their longing means something, that beauty has a home. But beauty doesn't live in her face or her voice. It lives in your mind. It lives in the space between presence and absence, in the ache, in the hunger that never ends. And that's why you keep falling for phantoms, because the fantasy will never disappoint you. She will never raise her voice, never tell you you're not enough. She is safe. She is still. She is yours, until you try to love a real woman and realize you don't know how.
The moment you try to love a real woman, something inside you flinches, not because she's cruel, not because she lacks grace or charm, but because she speaks in broken language, the language of the imperfect. She contradicts herself, she forgets, she bleeds, sometimes emotionally, sometimes biologically. And you, the man who built temples in your mind for an ideal woman to kneel in, feel something close to rage. Not at her, at reality. Because you've been seduced by an impossible form, and no living woman can compete with a ghost. Plato never said to stop loving ideals, he said to stop confusing them with matter. The ideal woman is not someone you will meet, she is someone you recognize glimpses of. A gesture, a tone, a look that fractures you open. That's all she was ever meant to be. a signal, a divine flare. But you fell to your knees and began worshiping the flare as if it were the fire. And that's why you keep falling apart in relationships. You think love is supposed to feel like elevation, like art, like poetry. But real love is clumsy. It breaks your rituals. It calls you out when you're lying to yourself. It does not arrive in silk or silence. It arrives sobbing or late or with baggage. And it dares you to stay. Plato's truth is devastating because it doesn't attack women. It exposes men. Men who think they're too noble for ordinary affection. Men who crave a woman not as she is, but as she could be, if she just stopped being human. You say you want to muse, but what you really want is control. Control over your own fantasy. You want her to behave in a way that doesn't offend your dream of her. And when she doesn't, you retreat. You write poetry. You wallow. You pretend you were betrayed. But she didn't betray you. She just existed. So where does that leave you? Caught between the metaphysical and the mundane. You can't love real women because they don't stay still. And you can't reach the ideal because she was never here. So you spiral. You romanticize longing. You call it standards. You say, she just didn't inspire me. But the truth is, you don't want to be inspired. You want to be obeyed. You want to dictate how she appears, how she thinks, how she loves. And you call this purity. Plato would tell you, you are not seeking beauty, you are fleeing pain. Because to truly love someone is to stand in front of their flaws and not flinch, to listen to their chaos and not impose silence, to see them not as an ideal, not as a symbol, but as a sovereign, changing, breathing thing. But you are afraid. You are afraid because if you stop chasing perfection, you'll have to confront something darker, that you've built your entire romantic life around avoidance, around distance, around safety. And you will have to admit that what you thought was high standards was actually fear dressed up in philosophy. That's the final cruelty of Plato's wisdom, that the more intellectual your love becomes, the less alive it often is. Because ideas don't need forgiveness. People do. Ideas are consistent. People aren't. And so you start to resent anyone who reminds you that love is not a sculpted statue, but a shifting, unfinished thing. And still, you ache. You lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of someone who almost matched the form. She had the smile, the voice, the silence between her words. But then she asked too much, or revealed too little, or simply reminded you that she existed beyond your imagination. So you let her go. And now you haunt yourself with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't wrong. Maybe it was you. Maybe you were too in love with your fantasy to touch reality without recoiling. You see, men like you, men who love ideals, do not get remembered by the ones they leave behind. Not with warmth, not with poetry. You are remembered as absence, as distance, as the man who was always reaching for something higher, even when someone real was standing right in front of him. And while you tell yourself you were searching for truth, what you were really doing was hiding. Behind Plato, behind beauty, behind abstraction. Because ideals don't cry when you abandon them. Real women do. You convinced yourself it was noble, that she deserved better than a half-hearted love, that it was more honorable to walk away than to pretend. But the truth is darker than that, isn't it? You didn't leave because she wasn't good enough. You left because she was too real, and realness terrifies you. Because it demands vulnerability. It demands that you let go of control. It demands that you allow for contradiction, the very thing your dream woman never contained.
You would rather write sonnets to a ghost than sit quietly with a flawed woman who loves you imperfectly. But love, if it's worth anything, is always imperfect, and Plato knew that too. He wrote of the soul's longing to return to the divine, but he never said you would get there by fleeing the physical. Quite the opposite. He said the journey begins with desire, with the body, with attraction, with the raw, aching mess of human love. That's the doorway. You start there not to escape reality, but to transcend through it. And if you cannot love a woman in her mess, in her mortal contradictions, you do not deserve the form you chase. You keep imagining she'll appear, the woman who never disappoints. But the older you get, the lonelier that hope feels. Your standards grow sharper. Your imagination becomes crueler. You compare everyone to a myth, and in doing so, you stop seeing them entirely. You look at her, and all you see is how she doesn't measure up. You no longer ask, "Who is she?" You only ask, "Why isn't she more like what I wanted her to be?" And in that moment, you aren't a lover. You're a tyrant of your own inner world. You mistake control for passion. You think detachment is wisdom. But deep down you know you are not powerful. You are terrified. Terrified that if you accept her as she is, you will have to accept yourself, that you too are not ideal, that maybe you never were. So here's Plato's final lesson, the one most men never hear because they stop reading when it gets uncomfortable. You must use beauty not as a finish line, but as a ladder. You see beauty in her and you climb toward it, not away from her, but through her pain, through her stories, through her failures. You do not abandon the imperfect in search of the divine. You find the divine by embracing the imperfect. That's the paradox. That's the shocking truth. You don't need to stop dreaming, but you do need to stop worshiping the dream. Let her be messy. Let her disappoint you. Let her change. And then love her anyway. Not because she's ideal, but because she's real. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greater form. Not the perfect woman who lives in your head, but the flawed woman who stays, who listens, who breathes beside you, and still chooses to love you back. That is where beauty begins, and that is where you must end the chase.